welcome. Let me officially welcome you to Culture Through Our Eyes.
Right.
A construct by Camel Brathwaite, as Camel Brathwaite challenged us in the Caribbean and perhaps by extension Africa, that we need to be able to see ourselves through our eyes, not the eyes of the colonizers, not being very aware that we were told one thing, which was a lie, which misleads us, that the colonial narrative can continue to impact us even in the independence movement, or for Barbados, the Republic movement. So he's challenging us to keep pushing, come to our eyes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, our topic today was offered by Reverend Eshun. The topic is Courage to Be, Multiple Human Identities in the Midst of History, Globalization, and Creolization. Online with us so far is Reverend Captain Roslyn Harper-Johnson. We expect to be joined by Reverend Dr. Sonia Hines. Reverend Eshun, welcome. Welcome to the warmth of the Caribbean. So I've been told we have someone from Trinidad online, Barbados, and others are going to be out there. Welcome. We all want to hear Courage to Be. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. And it's wonderful to reconnect from UK to Barbados and beyond. And I hope that this exchange and interaction will continue, because transatlantic dialogue has been one of my passion to foster. So I hope that it will continue. Well, I want to start with Shakespeare, which is very ironic since we are talking about culture through our eyes. Now, when Hamlet, those of you who through colonization have to
to be or not to be.
When you read the Hamlet's quote, to be or not to be,
yes,
that is the question. Whether it's nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, and by sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousands of natural shock that flesh is heir to, its consummation. Well, I deliberately selected Shakespeare's Hamlet speech as my opening sentence to illustrate a point that the problem confronting all of us, people of African descent, in the midst of globalization, creolization, and our complex history, is what we choose to be or not to be. That is the question. When Hamlet was, giving this speech, remember that he has been wrongfully treated by his stepfather, and he himself was going through turmoil. His father has been murdered, and the love of his life, Ophelia, seems to be also betraying him, or he seems to think that Ophelia is also betraying him. So the complexity of Hamlet's speech, to be or not to be, to live or to die, to choose life over death or suicide over life, is the challenge that is confronting us people of African descent all over the world. So the first thing that I want to suggest is that our situation of multiple identities that we need to carve for ourselves is not different from many contexts in which these multiple identities have been formed and shaped. So I want to use myself as part of to be or not to be as an example. Is Daniel, whose African name is Kweku Mensah, of Kormantse descent, who some of his ancestors were those who were first sent to Barbados, who was also baptized with a Christian name, Daniel, who was educated at Oxford, Durham, King's College, University of London, with Eurocentric view of history, philosophy, theology, anthropology, sociology, and political science. An authentic African, or is he someone else? And many of us could put ourselves in the same situation. The literature that we read, the history that we studied, the religion that, whether it's by choice or by imposition, let's not go there, but that is what we have now. So who are we really? Who are we in the midst of globalization, our complex history, both primary and middle passage history that we were talking about earlier on? And increasingly, wherever you go, creolization is becoming part and parcel of our stories. I have nieces who half Jamaican, half Ghanaians. I have nephews who have been married to African Americans, and it's all over the place. So who is Uncle Daniel to all these people? But let me formulate my basic argument. The basic argument that I want to put forward this morning, this evening, wherever you are in British context this evening, is drawn from the work of Toni Morrison, who many of you might have heard. Toni Morrison is an African-American educator. James Baldwin, another African-American novelist and public, campaigner. Cornel West, also a very somebody whose work I find it quite important in my own analytical discourse, and somebody that I call my mother, Maya Angelou. The reason why I call her my mother, Maya Angelou, is because my father knew her very well when she went to Ghana to teach during the time of Nkrumah's regime. And I didn't meet her personally, but my big brothers did meet her. So the name Aunt Maya has been part and parcel of our own family history. Now, let me start with how I came to draw on these important scholars in my own discourse to formulate my argument. Toni Morrison has this to say: definitions belong to the definers, not the defined. You are your own stories, and therefore free to imagine and experience what it means to be human. And although you do not have complete control over your narrative, no author does, and I can tell you, you could never create it, but you are your own story. So I want you to bear that in mind. We will come back to it again. James Baldwin, you have to decide who you are and force the world to deal with you, not its idea of you. You have to decide who you are and force the world to deal with you, not its idea of you. Cornel West, to be human, you must bear witness to justice. And I want to stress this as central to my thinking about who we are as African descent. The fact that we survive, that in itself is a miracle. Often when it was a friend of mine who once is English, and very aristocratic English, And when we were in Oxford, one day we were playing tennis and he said to me, then, sometimes when you talk about some of the things that you say in tutorials, it just fascinates me because for us, the magic of any people going through the experiences that people of African descent have gone through and yet have survived just beggars belief. No, you have to possess creativity, resilience, ability to know how to negotiate your life in the midst of abuse of power to survive. And our ancestors were creative enough to do that and to survive. So we are here. The Father, we are here. We are here to bear witness, to survive, to live as a person of African descent is to bear witness. And we bear witness to what? We bear witness to justice, the justice that our ancestors were denied. That is what we are here to bear witness to. And then Aunt Maya has this to say: courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you cannot practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage. So what we are calling for tonight is simply this: drawing all these people together, I put forward the simple argument. I argue that our complex histories, entrapment of globalization and creolization demands courage on our part to present ourselves and our multiple identities that each of us see fit, not defined by anybody, but you have to see what is fit for you in different time and place so that you can bear witness. So the argument is a basic one, that in our complex histories, entrapment of globalization and creolization, these demand on each one of us to have courage to present our multiple identities as each of us see fit in different time and place so as to bear witness. We do not have to surrender our power of self-definition and expression to anyone. Rather, we have to decide who we are for ourselves and force the world to deal with us, not its idea of us. And to pursue this line of argument, I would like to just outline a few issues surrounding the nature of history, globalization, and creolization, and then come back to the argument that I have highlighted. Well, history is complex, and history, contrary to being a study of the past, history is a study of the present in the light of the past. And just sometimes the way we treat history will make it look as if it's the past. History is still here. The present has evolved out of the past. Our attempts to sometimes behave as if history has nothing to do with the present. I want to humbly suggest that sometimes that in itself could be signs of trauma and the shame that memory brings on us whenever we think about history. So history is not simply a documentation of the past. Neither history is static, but history is the past and the present constantly interacting to forge something new. So it is what, as historians or as people, we try to do by looking at how events of the past have shaped us and continue to shape us, and how we could address its influence, both positive and negative. So history is a dialogue between the events of the past and progressively emerging future. So it's a constant dialogue, to look at history as if it is a dead one. It's not helpful within the context of what we are discussing. But let me just present two challenges that faces any historian. Often, historians do not possess all the contextual facts to make sufficient argument that discusses the causes, and consequences of any historical event. Any historians who will tell you that I know all the facts is not a proper historian, because history is very, very complex. And whose record are we looking at in the first place? Because anybody who writes history writes it from a particular point of view, and history itself is politicized. Hence, any historiography has inherent conjectures, it has romanticization and mythologization, and it is for ongoing conversation to demystify, demythologize, and sometimes de-romanticize. So who decide what counts as significant events in history? And then also the fact that there are accidentals in history makes it important that in every historical discourse, we have to be extremely careful so that we don't romanticize, we don't mythologize, and we don't, look at both the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that is for history, and we will come back to it in relation to human identity when we come back to it again. We are not makers of history. History makes us. The Daniel Eshun, who was African, named Kweku Mensah Opiadom. I didn't choose that name. It was those who gave birth to me who chose that name. I didn't choose Christianity by default. I was born into it. So being a minister, has been shaped by history as well. So history is what makes us. We are not makers of history. History makes us. Historical experiences shaped us and continue to inform the present with its good, bad, and ugly. Now, globalization, I'm not going to spend a lot of time about it because we are all living in it. The fact that Daniel is sitting in his office, in London, and speaking to my brothers and sisters in the Caribbean is a sign of part of globalization, speed up of movements and exchanges of human beings, goods and services, information technology, and cultural practices. If you came to London, I could take you to a nice Barbadian restaurant where you will have, wonderful, wonderful Barbadian chicken, and then you will lick your fingers. You will forget that you are in London, but you might think you are sitting by the seaside in Barbados, but it's London. Barbados is now part and parcel of culture in London. in my former parish before I came back to the academy as a professor, I used to have parishioners who will be debating whether it's going to be cricket, whether Barbadian or Jamaica is going to win the cricket match. And then even within the same parish, I have parishioners who will say that if only you were from a Christchurch parish, you wouldn't have behaved like that. And another member of the parish will say, if only you were born in St. John's, then you will have behaved properly, because in St. John's we do things properly. And all this was happening within my parish church in London, Notting Hill Gate. So the whole idea of globalization, where the globe is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, is all around here. Globalization, as a sociologist, I will always argue that it's not a modern phenomenon. I suggest that globalization is inherent to our human nature. You know, we've always wanted to explore beyond our own community. We've always wanted to transcend the immediate community to, make sure that we try as much as we can to know what is going on. As human beings, we are never satisfied. We think that the pasture is green, always at the other side. So globalization as a phenomenon of moving beyond the confinement of our own immediate context has always been inherent with human identity. But increasingly, this has become very faster, especially since the second half of the 20th century, because of technological advancement. So you can talk about economic globalization, which the development of trade system within transnational actors such as corporations and NGOs is everywhere. You know, you could talk about financial globalization. Barbados is now one of the financial markets in the global economy. And you can talk about cultural globalization. If you were to come to London in August at our carnival, you might think that you are St. Lucia, or you are at St. Vincent, or you are any of the Caribbean island could have equally have been like that. But this is happening in London because all of us have gravitated to London, and it has culture that we come with us, you know, have become part and parcel of the culture of the land that we all share and celebrate. So culture now is globalized. You know, you can hear people talking in London, different language, expressing different cultures. You know, even our politics is now to a very large extent globalized, because you have a situation where when America sneezes, the whole world catches cold. So we are in a globalized politics. And in our global world, you know, sociologically, we have also become global sociological globalization, which we are mixing and integrating different societies. You know, you can send a message in real time and people can receive it and interact and speak, unlike previous centuries. So to be or not to be, to die, to sleep, or to stay awake in the midst of all this depends on our inner resources that as individuals we are able to marshal to face the onslaught of the forces of globalization. And we will come back to it again. Then finally, let me touch, highlighted on Creolization. The word Creole is an interesting concept. Originally, it emerged within the Caribbean context, where it was describing a mixing together of different people and different cultures. Many of whom came from Africa, but as later in history, people from India and other parts also joined. So you have different, cultures emerging and rubbing shoulder to shoulder. It also affected, various forms of relationships. So traditionally, when we use the word Creolisation, we know that people of Africans in the diaspora trace their roots to Africa. By which part of Africa? Akan, Igbo, Yoruba, Xhosa, which part of Africa? So we are all African descent. However, the coming together, the amalgamation of different tribes and communities in one place have created, a mixture of cultures, which has fashioned a new form of identity, a Creole, which gives something beautiful, creative, as well as sometimes with its own identity challenges. So with Creolisation, what happens is participants select their elements from their incoming or inherited culture, and they give some of these things different meaning to creatively make something new out of the old and the emerging forms. So I will leave it there and then go to the issue of identity. The concept of identity, like globalization, like Creolisation, like our complex history itself, is complex because the concept of identity is shaped by our individual characteristics, by our family dynamics, by historical, social, and political factors. So who am I? The answer depends on, in large part, on who the world around me says I am. But as I will come back to it, you can decide not to give your power to anybody to define you. Who do my parents say I am? Who do my peers say I am? So you are the only person who can give answers to these questions. How am I represented in cultural images around me? Or am I missing from the picture altogether? You are the one who have to answer these questions. And these questions that I'm posing here are questions which are at the very core of identity. So identity refers to our sense of who we are as individuals and as members of social group. But whilst our membership in our social group is an important part of who we are, we still have the agency over how we define ourselves and what aspect of our identity we want to emphasize over others to formulate our personal identity. So our personal identity is our own self-definition, not definition as people give us, not definition as people think of us, but as we choose to present ourselves. So coming back to my argument, I am arguing this evening that our complex histories and the onslaught of globalization and the Creolisation that emerged out of our painful history demands from all of us to present ourselves as we sees fit in different time and place to bear witness unashamedly, to bear witness unashamedly. We do not have to surrender our power of self-definition and expression to anyone. Rather, we have to decide who we are for ourselves and force the world in the midst of the complex history, in the midst of globalization, in the midst of creolisation, to deal with us as we present ourselves and not allow people to use their ideas to define us. To be or not to be demands a courageous answer. Being is an existence itself. Being is living. To be is to be the authentic and real self in the actuality of living. I repeat, being is existence itself. When you cease to be, you have died. So being is existence itself. Being is living. To be is to be the authentic and the real self in the actuality of living. But sadly, as Oscar Wilde, again, going back to imbibing, European literature, whether forced or by design or by desire, sometimes very difficult to tell because I enjoy the work of Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde said, most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinion. Their lives are mimicry, and their passion are often quotation of other people. I want to suggest that in the midst of our complex history, in the midst of globalization and the painful history that has created creolisation, demands that we master the courage to be, to answer the question, to be or not to be, with affirmative, we have the courage to be who we are. We have the courage to be our authentic self. We have the courage not to surrender our power of self-definition to anyone, but rather we present ourselves and force the world to deal with us as we are, not its ideas of us. So thank you very much. I will leave it there for further questions and clarification.
Reverend Eshun, thank you. We present ourselves and force the world to deal with us. Is that what you said?
Yes.
A wonderful statement. Captain Reverend Johnson, I'm turning it over to you first to respond.
Good evening, everyone. As we say, the army is very hard to follow after the general. I've sat at the feet of my esteemed tutor and friend, and I simply don't have all the information and knowledge that he does, but I thought it quite interesting that without having a conversation with him, that the topic began with to be. And a very long time ago, when I was being chartered into the laity, the president of the then denomination at my charge used for me the words to be. Roslyn, she said, just be. And I thought it quite interesting as I start my journey in identity, etc., with Dr. Burrowes, that here we are once again reminding me of a statement that was given to me many, many years ago. And I do agree with Dr. Eshun in a lot of what he said, but I want to just narrow it down to my own journey and to some of the things that would have happened to me as I served coming down through the islands in the Caribbean. And if we look at the verb to be, it starts out with I am. And we were reminded today that who we are must start with knowing who you are. I am. And I am is not shaped by some of the things of the word today. It was be nourished by my former years as I speak to the church, maybe the family setting, the values that were given to you start to shape you as to who I am then. But I believe that as we get older, those views or some of those things are either defined, some of them you have to rid yourself of, and you take on a different role. And so the I am takes a different form, a different format, even though there's some of the things that would have been shared with you in your younger years, build a platform in a global world. And you are, I know who I am, but I will be, or you are going to be a number of things to different people, to other persons. And again, Dr. Eshun speaks about that, what the world sees you as. And so I say, Roslyn, these are some of the different shapes or ideas people see you. And yes, you have a place, may have a place because you're not living on an island by yourself, but they must not change who I am, the core of who I am. And again, I go down the verb, he or she is just as important as you are. We speak about being in this global community, and everyone have something to offer. And it is just as important as what you have to offer too. But it does not mean that everything that they offer, you have to, especially when it's being said about you, that you have to accept it, because you must know and come back to the core of I am. As we heard the discourse just now, we think about the many things that we have heard in the world and the very thoughts and the pressures of our ancestors, and the people try to say, but you don't have that DNA, but no matter how tiny it is, we still have stood over the period of time on what happened back then as the slave trade and all that happened there still influence us now. And if we look very carefully, some of the things may not be like the slave trade as is, but there are still some things that have us enslaved, and they still shape who we are within this big global world of ours. And many persons have not accepted the fact that we have things to offer as people of color, Black people, whatever you want, Africans, wherever we may have found ourselves, part Jamaican, part Antiguan, part Vincentian, that, as Professor said, we have a mission. And so tonight is very interesting. I am waiting for when we bring it down to the whole issue of the church, and because that's really one of what I'm interested in. How do we help people to understand that how we are shaped theologically and spiritually? It may differ, but we still have a I am, that core of who we are and how we express ourselves spiritually. I want to probably just stop that here. This is just my introduction. I have some other points, and maybe as the questions come up, then I would speak again or add a little more to what I am thinking this evening. But I am very happy that I'm being reminded of I am and just to be. Dr. Burrowes.
No, I am in heaven because I teach courses on identity, and having Reverend Dr. Eshun here say these things. Reverend, would you like to respond to her? Dean, Reverend, I must give you your full titles, by the way. I forgot.
No. Daniel is enough for me. Daniel is enough for me. I think,
right. Thank you.
You know, as my sister was saying, you know, the thing that I think I am, I always, I link the, you know, who are you? I think that Jesus was the first person, in my opinion, who sparked for us the importance of identity for us as Christians. He asked the disciples before the transfiguration, "Who do people say that I am?" And you know, some say you are John the Baptist, some say you are this, and then he asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" You know, and I always say to, you know, not that I'm an expert in this, so, you know, Alistair, as a biblical scholar, if he's on, she should forgive me if I err. But I always say to New Testament students that you can never understand the temptation of Jesus without understanding the affirmation at his baptism. At his baptism, there was a voice who said, "You are my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased." Then, in the temptation, the persistent question that came was, "If you are the Son of God, if you are the Son of God, if you are the Son of God, if you are the Son of God, turn stone into bread. If you are the Son of God, jump," so that there will always be questions that will test your identity. But who you choose to be is you knowing who you are in God. My spiritual director used to give me an exercise. So be still and know that, my sister referred to it, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know. Be still. And then he will go down to be. Our being in God is the core of our identity. So just like each one of us, God has given each one of us identity by being born into this world. You know, in the midst of complexity, globalization, complex history, Creolisation, God has already given us identity by forming us in his own image. And persistently, there will be the question, just as it was for Jesus during the temptation. You know, 5th of March, we all start Ash Wednesday. We go to the wilderness to be like Jesus. And the question that perhaps, if there is any among the spiritual exercise that we could take on, is to take on Jesus's question that was posed to him: who, if you are, who are you? Who are you really? And the answer should always be, I am a child of God, rooted in God. And because I'm rooted in God, history, Creolisation, and globalization can be a resource to use to create who God wants me to be, not who the world wants me to be. So coming back to the church, I think one of the challenges facing the church is to listen to the Spirit. The Spirit is the one who brings all the different facets of our life for us to create new identity every day. I'm just reminded by Lamentation, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. They are renewed every morning, and great is his faithfulness. So new identities are quite being formed and formulated every day by the Spirit of God who is at work in each one of us. But my sister's question, and I hope we will have the time to explore, how do we encourage one another within the church to know that in the midst of globalization, in the midst of complex history and creolisation, we have a task of creating an identity that helps us to bear witness, because we have something to bring to the table. We have something to bring to the table. And often we don't see that we have something to bring to the table.
I just want to say that we are not taking the slant tours last week, but no matter who your spiritual being is, your higher being, Father Dan and myself, and maybe Onika, who's the next student here, and some of my other colleagues I see, we may move towards the Christian side of it, but somewhere, I mean, out there is a spiritual being that creates or encourage or mold a person into the identity. I don't believe we just drop here. And no matter who we are or where we are or how we look at it, as Father Dan said, Eshun said, we are shaped every single day. And that's so beautiful that even though we know who we are, every single day, there's something new that we discover about ourselves. I'm certain that 70 years or nearly 100 years ago, nobody would expect that we're here in this setting and we're all different places across this beautiful world, and we can come together to discuss something that is as pertinent or important to the world, which is who we are. What place do we have? And if we're looking at it from the position of being people who have a connection with Africa, coming down to that we do have, and we have made a place in this world. We have contributed things, but there's still some of us who have allowed the to be. If you go down the verb, it say he, she, or it is. There are a lot of us who have accepted the it. We have moved from being persons to accept the it of what others think that we are. And, we become like a piece of paper or something like that, and we just accept. But as I go right back to our featured speaker who says, we have a mission. And whatever it is, we are people who have something to offer. And we must be those people. Thank you.
We're opening the line for anyone online who's with us to comment.
The thing was, I found the presentation extremely interesting, but we have people who perhaps do not have the courage, or perhaps because they are so traumatized, they can't identify themselves as strongly as has been proffered to us. Some of these people, are children who need people who need counseling and so forth. So I would like to know, how could we get that group, because it's not a small group, how we could get those people who don't have a strong sense of self to develop one.
Thank you for the question, because it's one of the question that confronts people of African descent all over the world.
Yes.
And as I travel around, I see it all the time. Just last week when I was with, in the wonderful College of Quadranton, I was making an allusion to that. I think what has not been named cannot be tamed, and what has not been tamed cannot be reclaimed. I think the first steps that we need to take as people of African descent, and I'm on record in Ghana, so I'm not saying anything new. We have to accept our trauma, that this happened to us. I have said publicly in Ghana that corruption in Africa will never stop unless Africans have come to terms with their own traumatized history and how they complicited. To be complicit in any situation. I mean, we can pray for forgiveness. Forgiveness for what? If you haven't even accepted the role that you played, how can you be forgiven? And I think for all of us, the point is what has not been named cannot be tamed, and what has not been tamed cannot be reclaimed. People think that they can buy themselves things and cover their emptiness and define themselves by material things. I always joke, but it's a serious joke. Said, we people of African descent, we buy things that we don't need so that we can impress people that often we don't like. So, but it's all because underneath this pretension is the trauma that we have not actually engaged with. So the first steps within our communities which we need to talk about, and this needs to be one of the issues that we address in our churches. Who are we really? Jesus said, who do people say that I am? And who do you say that I am? How often do we as a church, do we ask ourselves the question? Yes, we've been baptized. We go to the Holy Communion, but who are we? Who are we? And until that question is addressed, and shame can sometimes prevent us from tackling difficult questions. And I think our history sometimes may be shameful, but we shouldn't be ashamed of it because we are not the perpetrators. We are the victims. And I think that is how, this is not to say that the Africans chiefs were the good guys and the Europeans were the bad guys. I always say this, that perpetrators of trauma and victims of trauma are both traumatized. You cannot create hell and not sniff the scent of hell. So whoever creates hell also experiences hell. So both perpetrators and victims of creation of hell, are both traumatized. And for me, my dear sister, I think the first step, the question that you've just asked, is a pertinent one. It's all right for us as intellectuals, academics, professionals to have this sophisticated conversation. But what are the wider implications for our brothers and sisters who live with the daily reality of self-recrimination, lack of confidence, lack of self-esteem, lack of, understanding of the sense of self? We have a job. And perhaps one of the things that when I came to Barbados, my first, experience of coming to Cave Hill to enjoy this wonderful conversation that we had, Dr. Barrow, at your class. It was absolutely amazing because it wasn't planned. It was just a bunch of people who have gathered in a classroom under an academic having a conversation, an unscripted conversation. And for me, that is the job of the church. That is what the church should do. The church should create communities where people can come together to talk about things that matter. We do catechisms in our churches. What do these catechisms actually prepare people for? So my dear sister, the question that you've asked is a pertinent one, and it demands courage on each one of us to start these conversations in our communities. It may, like the master seed, this conversation that I started here, cultural through our identities through our eyes, may start as a very small thing, but this is how movements start. And it is for each one of us to be an evangelist of how do we help people to come to terms with our sense of loss, and how do we help people to start to find themselves again. And I think for me, if there was one of the pleasures that I took away when I came to Barbados was just coming to Cave Hill, and my sister, as always, she who must be obeyed. You have to obey the captain, okay? Wherever you are. Never disobey the captain. So, going to that class and having this conversation was one of the things that made me thought perhaps our way of finding ourselves again is through these conversations. Perhaps through the power of God's Spirit, we will find ourselves somewhere.
I've muted myself. Would anyone else like to make a comment or an observation?
Yes, please. I'm Michelle. I'm not a student. I'm thinking about it. And I find this this topic sometimes contradictory and fascinating and frustrating, everything. If somebody when somebody asks me, who are you? I would say, I'm Michelle from Barbados. And then when you go to school and you learn the history and it's part of the Caribbean islands. And then when I look at the map and I see, but Barbados isn't touched by the Caribbean Sea. We are in the Atlantic Ocean. And then you're telling me that I'm an African. You understand? You see where the frustration lies? And then you hear, oh, we have to develop our culture. I've always lived in Barbados. I've never been to Africa. I've never been to America. I love the Caribbean islands. But you're telling me I'm an African. Right? So how do you teach somebody like me, well, as I was then, to recognize the African in themselves? Now I get frustrated when I go into a church and I know there's a hymn, and I don't know if it's how it feels for other persons, but for me, each hymn for me has a rhythm. Each hymn has a rhythm. And I can feel the beat in my body. Therefore, I'm going to start to move a certain way. My hands are going to express myself a certain way. I'm going to sing a certain way. You understand? So that's very funny contradiction. we have to find our own identity, and each person has to explore that for themselves. When we talk about trauma, do we understand the trauma? Do we? That's what I wonder. It's just an observation.
I mean, I think the concept of what you are expressing as a Barbadian is a legitimate one. But one of the things that perhaps it will not help the reason why Trump was elected, is that Americans don't see themselves as Americans. They see themselves as white Americans who migrated from Europe, and therefore America must be kept purely white. It will be politically doing oneself the service to simply to ignore where we have come from and where we are. The reason is, I mean, when Britain talks about the fact that Britain and America have special relationship, or Australia and Britain has special relationship, or New Zealand and Britain has special relationship, or Canada and America has it. It's all because they have histories. No white American, no white Australian, no white New Zealander is going to tell himself that I'm just a New Zealander. When you are a white New Zealander or a white American or a white Canadian and you come to Britain, you are referred to as expats. If you are Black, you are immigrants. So I think sometimes the painful reality of our histories is that we have to, also recognize, without necessarily identifying with a particular context, where one has come from. Because as you said, when you are singing, you want to, hold your hands in a particular way, rhythmatic movement in a particular way. This will be different from many other people that you might encounter in whether it's Anglican Church or Catholic Church or, So all of us, our identities is defined by us. But the ingredient for these creation of identities are also process of history, process of globalization, process of Creolisation. To ignore any of these ingredients is what has brought us where we are. When I was at a clergy retreat, I make a point, and my sisters forgive me because it's a point that is dear to my heart. We spent over 12.8 billion as African Americans and African descent just buying Indian hair to cover our head. Why? Is our hair not good enough? Is our hair not pretty enough? But it's because we have been told how we have to look. And we ourselves have not looked at our individual histories to see where we've come from and how we want to define ourselves. So I completely understand the frustration, but what will not serve as well? It doesn't matter how long an Indian go to live in America or how long an Indian go to live in Africa, East African Indians will always refer to themselves as Indians. And, so I understand the frustration, but not to recognize some of the factors in history that have shaped us will be undermining our own identities.
Michelle, I want to thank you, Reverend Eshun. One of our topics coming up is looking at Barbadian identity and the challenges that Barbadians of African descent have faced for literally almost 400 years, not Barbadians of European descent. So when the statement is made that Barbados has no culture, the underlying implication is we're not speaking about those of European descent. We are speaking of the Africans. And you may or may not know, I'm inviting you to the panel, which is probably it's looking like the end of the month. But you may not know that when the Africans were enslaved and brought to Barbados, they were officially not human. To enslave them, they were declared as chattel or property. And for me, one of the resonances in Barbados has no culture is, don't forget, you are not a human. You are here to be a labor force. And one of the things we're thinking of is the topic, just to let you know, to show you where we're going, is the ancient lie. Camel Braffett, the same Camel Braffett, called this an ancient and crooked lie, picking out on why it became that construct and why is it still around. They were saying ancient lie, perpetual cultural strangulation. Because by 400 years, you're still saying Barbados has no culture, when it is obviously a lie. So what is being derived from it? And one of the images I have about perpetual cultural strangulation is literally somebody strangling you.
Actually, you don't want to see me. You don't want to see me here. Actually, doing the same thing.
You're doing the same thing. So
Bless
you know
you.
that it's a kind of kinky thing as well. Some people, it's a thing with the pendulum, and you're supposed to have great sexual pleasure on the point of death. Unfortunately, you die. Some people don't know. But that to me is perpetual strangulation, that even though you are creating and emerging and becoming all the identities, being told you have no culture is like this. Perpetual strangulation, hold you back, hold you back. Yes, Reverend Eshun looks like he wants to say something.
Thank you, thank you.
So
keep an eye out for that. Reverend Eshun, what do you think? Well,
what I was going to say is, it's that is why no group of people can be treated the way our ancestors were treated in the diaspora, without distortion of their history, without the distortion of their identity. Professor Buckles have written this wonderful book on Akans who came to Barbados, and I am Akan, okay, and fortunately, unfortunately, I am also a Comanche, people who were the first troublemakers in Barbados. And as far back as 1675, the Comanches who came to Barbados were the first people to say that, we are going to rebel against slave trade. They were crucified and made a public display in Bridgetown. Kofi, who led the revolt, So how come the people who claim to be civilized didn't see anything wrong with what they were doing, and the people that they claimed they were animals and chattels and knew that what you are doing is wrong? And for me, Michelle, claiming these forms of history, and that was the point that Buckles was trying to make in his book, that often not knowing the history that you come from also does not help you to know the contribution that you have made. In 2008, when they were celebrating the 200 years anniversary of emancipation of slave trade, I made a point within Church of England that don't behave as if you were the only people who knew what is right. Our ancestors knew that what was right in 1675, and you butchered them. So don't pretend that you are the only people who have monopoly over morality. And I think for me, claiming aspect of our history also help us to know the contribution that we have made. You know, often people present history as if the Europeans are the only people who have made contribution to history. Spanish culture will not have been Spanish culture without the Moors who came from, you know, Africa. So knowing who we are and our history also gives us confidence to know the contribution that we ourselves have made towards what is now celebrated and enjoyed by all.
Thank you. Any other comments? Oh, Reverend Harper, did you want to say something? Sorry.
I wanted to say in connection with Michelle, what she said, that we all struggle. I have been to training abroad where I sat in a environment where I am the only Black person there, and you were asked to introduce yourself, and people started to introduce themselves from, you know, all these big corporations, etc. But here was this little Black girl from Barbados who was sent there to train in human behavior. And so I introduced myself the only way that I could at that time. You know, I am trying to match up with them. You know, I work, I have. Now, you know, if you go, it's a different thing, because you don't need to be afraid or ashamed, but you can identify with where you came from and your struggle. So I know what it is like, Michelle, to have that feeling of all these different things, and how do you identify yourself. And with Miss Pemberton, I work in the area of counseling and stuff. We do have a lot of children who are traumatized, and even now. And one of the things we try to do is we try to avoid the pain. But you must acknowledge the pain, acknowledge, yes, this is what you've been through or whatever, but you don't have to stay there. You can move forward with the help of different strategies or persons or support. You can go forward. So certainly, as Professor said, you know, Jesus, we there's so many things that we try to avoid because we don't want to identify with them. And it is interesting, about 10 years ago, I went to a conference, and here we are introducing ourselves, and somebody asked if my country was part of another Caribbean country, and those Caribbean people there felt that they were large and in charge, and we are all the same in the Caribbean, struggling to be recognized. So even among ourselves, we have that struggle of identity. Which country is low island and which island is big island, and who have the most advanced education system, and all of us are people, Black people, who are descendants of. And so maybe that's for another time, where how can we, even when we start to think about our own culture, how can we even among ourselves realize that, yes, we too, even though we are in different land spaces, we are still eating out of the same pot.
Yes, that wonderful phrase.
Yeah.
Reverend Eshun, we can't see what you're showing.
Yeah, this book is from Diocese of Armagh in Ireland. Okay, the reason why I have taken this book is when I came here originally in 2005. those of you who know the history of Ireland, Armagh is in Ireland. What the English people did to Irish people was terrible. Okay, the Protestant English Church, Church of England, thought that the Catholics were going to hell. I was sent a book to Dr. Barrow, and he was sent it to, it's on, there is a book that is entitled To Hell or Barbados.
Yes.
Okay? And when I was appointed, I was then doing something on issues of trauma and identity. So that Archdiocese of Armagh approached me and said, we know our children have been traumatized because of centuries of history. So I used to bring 20 young people from the Catholic side, and then 20 young people from the Protestant side, and then I will bring them to Whitelands where I am, where, and then during the summer, and then I will interact with them, take them to various places in London. At one point, I even took them to Africa for them to see how different tribes try to get on, okay? So it may be the Catholic tribe or it may be the Protestant tribes. There are so many tribes across the world. And one of the things that we learn to do is to learn to get on. I think why I brought the Armagh issue here is that sometimes, because we've always been put down, the danger is also that we think we are the only people who are going through the pain of creation of identity. I still go to Northern Ireland and Ireland almost every year to lead retreats, to lead youth work. There is still the Protestant Catholic tension because of what Oliver Cromwell did in the 1650s. So the question of identity is something that is painful whenever history is being confronted. So I think what I think, when you have a wound and you want the wound to heal, sometimes you have to peel off the painful layers so that whatever you have to apply to the wound to heal will heal properly. And in my experience, I think sometimes the pain is too raw to, kind of name it so that we can tame it, so that we can reclaim it. Last August, I was in Kingston, Jamaica, and the anthropology instinct kicked in. So I decided to do participant observation by default. So I started visiting revival churches, revivalists, went to visit some of the Maroons on the Highlands, and then went to some of the revivalist movement worship. And I had a moment where I was filled with shame, guilt, and I also had a mystical experience all rolled in one. And the shame, the guilt, and the mystical experience rolled in one was, I visited this revivalist churches, and those of you who have an experience of this revival, spirit possession sometimes come in. So one woman got possessed and started dancing with me. Okay, now this is how spooky it gets. The dancing that this woman was dancing with me was the dancing that my grandmother used to dance with me. I have never met this woman anywhere in my life. And both of us picked up the rhythm as if we knew each other from the distant past. And as we were dancing, tears were just flowing from, is she my ancestor? Is she my great-grandmother? Is she who? But I cannot miss the fact that there is some of spooky, that's the only way I could describe it, spooky connectedness between us. You know, when I was coming last Thursday, at Bridgetown, I nearly had a heart attack. I saw somebody who looked like my brother. And I said to my brother when I came back to England, I said, John, I saw somebody, who nearly gave me a heart attack because I knew you were here, staying in my house. So I thought you were dead and your ghost was chasing me in Barbados. So we roared with laughter. But the point that I'm trying to make is, we may deny history, but the genetic connection can never be denied because they are biological facts.
Genetic connection. It is true, Reverend, it is very true, Doctor. Because we do not know our brothers and sisters, that's why that one of the most powerful moments in history was in 1970s, the Black Power movement, when the decision was made to call you brother, call you sister, claiming a connection. We have lost it. We can't trace it like the Europeans can, but we know each other. Reverend Eshun, Dr. Reverend Harper-Johnson says, let us acknowledge Prince, her Ghanaian friend who is actually online with us, who is the organizer for the African community here in Barbados. Prince, welcome. Is he
Hello,
still?
I suppose I'm supposed to unmute myself, ain't I? I was hoping to just go incognito all night.
No, you were spotted, sir. You were spotted. Welcome.
Hello. I've been listening, and I totally agree with everything you've said, everything which has been shared. And it's very, and it's so true, as in that, the point raised about the genetic, even when you don't accept it, the biology does not lie, and the phenotypes don't lie, and the deep genetics, I think, does not lie. And yeah, so you're right. But also, the thing I'd like to add is, it seems to be, well, it looks like the time is right. I don't know. Did we mention? Did we discuss that? Roslyn, about the time being right. I think it looks like we're ready to learn about each other, in a way which wasn't happening a few years ago. It looks like we're ready to listen, and that looks to be a good thing, because for example, I find myself here on an online platform with all of you, which I may not have done a few years ago, and in everything I'm doing here, I do my little bit, right? For example, just today, I got students, Ghanaian students, to interface with Barbadian students, and these are kids, right? These are from class 1 to 4. And they were talking to each other, and they were sharing stories, and they knew each other's languages, and they were sharing proverbs, some of which were very similar. So, so the point we made, and the point we kind of all parties agreed, where we are a lot more similar than we've been told, or than we care to think about. So I suppose, as I was saying, the time seems right, and it looks like everything is drawing us together. Yeah, through online fora, and through an event which I'm organizing as Africa Day. And the simple reason for that is to just have a space where we have African music and African food and African clothing, in a way you would have in London in the summer in the park, in the way you'd have in New York. We haven't had that yet. And if Barbados comes out and and part of what I've been saying as I've been trying to publicize it is, you would come and realize that we're a lot more similar than you would think we are in the food, in the rhythm, and in everything. So yeah, so these are the little things I'm doing here. And it kind of clicks.
I ask you, Prince, when is your event?
Oh, it's on the 22nd of March.
Oh, it's coming.
It's coming
Right.
up. It's
This
coming
is,
up. It's coming up.
African Awareness Month. So I was
It
thinking
is African
I know the
Awareness
time.
Month. I know, and that's just finished. And what I usually say when I've spoken to the kids in the schools is, obviously you don't need 1 month to define you to be Black.
Yes.
You don't need
yes.
1 month to define you to be African. I didn't pick it, but that just goes to show you that you can celebrate anytime. Right. So this is actually it's actually part of the Bridgetown International Arts Festival, which is the entire month of March. And there are various things which promote arts and culture. And I've taken that opportunity to put on this thing for the African community. Well, and Barbados, obviously. So yes. So just to summarize, I totally agree. I've loved everything I've heard tonight. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I did share it to some other people who had prayer engagements, but they're looking out for a recording. So fingers crossed, I'll be able to share a recording with them, and that'd be great. And
Allison is on. We are preparing recordings to put on our YouTube channel.
That's
we have
amazing.
a channel, Allison, or we can post it.
That's amazing.
Posting it so that others can see and follow, etc. From last week's, there were so many requests for last week's recording, so we're preparing that, and we'll put up this one. Rev Eshun, I recognize, though it is only 7:30 on our side, it is.
Don't worry about me. Don't worry about me.
Because I was going to say, are there any other pressing? Does anyone else have a comment? Because I want to release Reverend Eshun. It's nearly midnight in England. Yes, Reverend Morgan.
Yes, in agreement with I think with the other speakers and so on. It's about understanding our history and understanding who wrote the history that we were taught. And then it's from that perspective that we learn. So we know Columbus, we know Walter Raleigh, and we know Henry Morgan and all these English people, but we don't know the Akan people. And I think Dr. Eshun mentioned some names, and they're not familiar to us because of that history that we have learned. The other thing is as well, how much is in the quest for defining identity, or in the quest for our identity, how much do we come from a Western individualistic perspective of finding out who we are? So it brought me back to the Ubuntu, I am because we are. Yes. So that the idea of community and so on is technically out the window, and we tend to think that we have to do this by ourselves, and we have to find ourselves by ourselves. So how much of that is that whole Western influence on our thinking?
I think you've touched on one of the philosophical questions that we, as people of African descent, we haven't embraced. You know, we, even in our theology, in our sociology, we start with, Western Kantian understanding of the world. I think, therefore I am. Whereas we would say, we are, therefore I am. And it is my definition of the self is in relation to the community. So again, Africans were told that we didn't have philosophy until, recently when people started digging into African Caribbean philosophy. We just had theology of an introduction to Caribbean theology by recently by our colleague in Quadrington and Birmingham. The name will come to me, Carlton Turner. So I think part of our identity is also reclaiming our philosophical concepts. So, what you've just touched on, instead of I think, therefore I am, also going back to our own philosophical epistemology, which says we are, therefore I am, and how that shapes even our Christian understanding. A social anthropologist went to Africa, and he asked 5 young people to run to go and pick an apple that he has put as a prize. And they all held their hands and ran towards the apple together, and then arrived at the same time and shared the apple. And it was baffling to him. So one of the children said, what would be the point if I'm the only one who will win to have the apple? What joy will it give me? And what joy will it give others? But by being there together and sharing it together is what affirms each of us, our dignity. Interestingly, the sense of we against I is now coming back to Western philosophical thought, because they have come to realize that individuality is killing their society. So we have to also claim some of our philosophical identities that also has shaped who we are. Ubuntu is what prevented bloodbaths in South Africa. It's quite, people talk about, how South Africa apartheid didn't lead to bloodbath. What people forget is that had it not been the philosophical understanding of Ubuntu, they would never have had safe transition to peaceful coexistence. So I'm with you. Claiming our own historical philosophy will be a very good thing in our creation of identity.
Thank you, Reverend Eshun. For those of us online, you will notice that there's a flyer that's come up, said, "Get Culture Through Our Eyes" flyers inbox. We're trying to create an email list. So please just apply your email that we can email you, because we are going to keep going over the weeks. I know Reverend Eshun is being very lovely, but it really is minutes to midnight. Do we have any other comments? I do not want to be responsible for a dean collapsing in his chair because he was talking. Do we have any?
I'm used to it. I'm used to it.
You're used to it. Because I would love to wrap up and thank Reverend Eshun for sharing us. I teach, I've written courses on identity. I actually have a course now. Let's see if you can see me. Of course, you can see my identity. One of our courses, Culture and Identity, which is taught throughout the first year, 65 students. And it is wrestling with various ways of interacting with what is an identity, how our identity is made. We talk about cuckoo, what happens? We talk about flying fish, what happens? Yesterday, I said to my class, stay tuned 4 weeks from now, will we have a United States of America? Because it seems that it's going to the way right. We are revisiting 1930s Europe, and we all know what happened then. And they seem to be ticking it off. And the students were staring at me. I said, no, honestly, I've taught European history. This is the book. This is the book. Do not assume a country is a country. Look what Putin did with Ukraine. He said, you're not a country. You're not a country. I'm coming. You're not a country. Oh, and told everyone else, don't come. This is not a war, a battle of words. This is me. So I think you've thrown up so many things. I kept making notes. Thank you, Reverend Eshun. Thank you, Captain Lynn Harper-Johnson. Your insights were really thought-provoking as well. Thank you very much. Who am I? Who I am.